The Grand Hall of the Avaran Empire was one of the most magnificent places in the known galaxy. It stretched for hundreds of meters, its high ceiling glowing with artificial starlight. Crystal panels reflected colors like a river of light, and pillars carved from silver stone stood proudly along the sides. The floor itself shimmered as though stars had been caught beneath glass. It was not only a hall of government. It was a symbol of power, wealth, and history. Every wall seemed to whisper that the Avaran Empire had ruled for ages, and that no one could challenge its greatness. That day the hall was filled with leaders and envoys from many different species. Some had skin that shone like liquid metal. Others were covered in scales that gleamed green and blue. A few were tall and thin with translucent arms that moved like ribbons of water. Each species had come to witness the Queen of Avaran as she welcomed them into her domain. All spoke in hushed tones, careful not to break the dignity of the place. Every sound echoed as if the hall itself listened. Among all these powerful and ancient beings stood a single human. His name was Daniel. He was not tall or grand, and he wore no armor or crown. He was dressed in a simple dark uniform with the small crest of earth on his chest. He was not a commander, not a senator, not even a senior diplomat. He had been sent only as an observer, a young representative to learn how humans might one day fit into the wider galaxy. Daniel stood near the back, behind stronger and more decorated delegates from larger species. He was not used to such gatherings. His heart beat quickly in his chest, though his face showed calm. He looked at the shining walls, the towering aliens, and the jeweled crown at the far end of the hall, and he thought to himself that he was like a grain of sand on a shore of giants. The crowd grew silent as the great doors opened. A wave of sound rolled through the chamber, not loud but powerful, like the deep hum of the stars themselves. The Queen of Avaran entered. Queen Sirathis was unlike any other. Her form was tall and elegant, her skin pale silver that shimmered like the moon. Her hair flowed long and dark, and her crown was shaped like wings of light. Yet it was not her beauty alone that held the eye. It was the presence around her, the force that made every being lower their gaze or hold their breath. She had ruled for decades, some said centuries, and had defeated every rival who had tested her. To her people she was strength and wisdom. To her enemies she was fear. She moved with measured steps down the shining path, and each sound of her footsteps echoed like music across the hall. Her gaze passed over the rows of ambassadors and rulers, cold and sharp, as if weighing each of them on invisible scales. None dared to speak. Daniel stood still, hoping to remain unnoticed. He told himself that he was only there to watch. Humanity was still young among the stars. They had only begun to travel beyond their own system in the last few decades. They had no great fleets, no grand empire. Earth was respected but not feared. It was expected that humans would keep their heads low among such powers. Yet as Sirathis walked, her eyes moved from one row to another, until suddenly they stopped. They stopped on him. Daniel felt a shock run through him. He had seen her before, at a distance in broadcasts or recorded meetings, but never had he been under her direct gaze. Her eyes were deep, shining silver, yet within them burned a light that seemed older than time. He felt as though the air had grown heavy, pressing against his chest. Still, he did not look away. Something in him told him that to look away would be a mistake. The hall noticed. The ambassadors shifted, whispering quietly. No one understood why the queen would pause her gaze on a human, an unimportant guest at the edge of the gathering. The whispers spread quickly, rising like waves of confusion. Sirathis stopped walking. She stood in the center of the hall, her long robe flowing like liquid light around her. The silence deepened until it seemed the walls themselves had frozen. Then, with a voice both soft and commanding, she spoke. Human. The single word rang out, strong enough that every being heard it, yet gentle enough that it seemed to be spoken only to him. Daniel's breath caught. He had never expected to be addressed, not in this place, not by her. He forced his voice steady. Yes, Your Majesty, he said, his words echoing faintly. The Queen tilted her head. Her expression did not change, yet something unspoken passed across her eyes. It was not anger, not disdain, but something far stranger. She looked at him as though she saw something hidden even to himself. The silence stretched. Delegates glanced at one another, unsure if they should speak or wait. None wished to break the moment. Finally, Cyrithis turned and continued her walk, yet her gaze lingered on him longer than on anyone else. She climbed the steps of her throne and sat with grace, her robe folding around her like wings. When she raised her hand, the crowd bowed in unison. Daniel bowed too, though his mind raced. Why had she looked at him? Why had she spoken to him alone, in front of all others? He felt as though invisible threads had tightened around him, pulling him into a story he did not understand. The Queen began her address. Her words were about unity, peace, and the power of the Avaran Empire. She spoke of alliances and trade, of promises and strength. Her voice filled the hall, commanding attention. Yet even as she spoke, her eyes drifted once more to the human standing at the back. It was brief, almost unnoticeable, but Daniel felt it. Whispers grew again among the crowd. Some delegates frowned. Others looked curious. A few looked concerned. In their long lives, they had never seen their queen look more than once at someone so unimportant. Something unusual was happening, and it unsettled them. Daniel tried to steady his breathing. He reminded himself that he was here to observe, nothing more. But his heart knew that the day was no longer ordinary. A line had been crossed, though he could not yet name it. When the speech ended, the Queen rose again. Her tall figure glowed under the light of the ceiling stars. She raised her hand, silencing the hall with a single gesture. Her gaze swept across the gathering, and then, once again, she looked at him. The pause lasted long enough for every eye in the hall to turn his way. He could feel the weight of hundreds of stares. He felt like a small stone in the middle of a storm. And then, the Queen smiled. It was faint, almost invisible, but it was real. For one who rarely showed emotion, it was like a crack in a wall of stone. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Something greater than him had just begun. The hall, however, did not yet understand. The leaders murmured, the ambassadors whispered, but none could guess why the Queen of Avaran had given such attention to a human. For Daniel, the day had started as routine. Now it had become a turning point. He did not yet know it, but history itself had shifted when the Queen's eyes found his. The hall of the Avaran Empire remained filled with low murmurs as Queen Cyrithis took her throne. Her robe folded around her like flowing silver waves, and her crown shone beneath the starlight ceiling. Dozens of alien leaders sat in their places, yet none dared to speak until the Queen herself allowed it. Even the air seemed to wait for her command. Daniel stood near the back, his thoughts tangled. He had expected to be invisible at this gathering. Instead, the Queen had not only looked at him but spoken to him. It had been a single word, yet it carried weight greater than he could understand. The whispers of the other delegates had not stopped since. He felt their eyes on him, measuring him, questioning why a simple human had drawn the queen's notice. Then Cyrithis raised her hand, and silence fell like a curtain. Her gaze swept across the hall with calm authority. Every delegate straightened in their seat, prepared to listen. "Today we gather," she said, her voice clear and powerful, "not only to speak of trade or alliances, but to remind ourselves of the truth. Strength alone does not build an empire. Trust does. Loyalty does. And without loyalty, even the strongest throne will crumble." The words rolled across the chamber. Many nodded, others whispered to their aides. None could deny the truth of her statement. Yet as she continued, her eyes did not rest on her people or her allies. They moved once more to Daniel. He felt his stomach tighten as her gaze lingered. He wanted to step back, to fade into the shadows, but there was no place to hide. She was watching him, and everyone could see it. Then, before the entire hall, Queen Cyrithis spoke words that no one could have expected. "I wish you were my husband, human." The hall froze. The words were spoken with calm clarity, not as jest, not as mistake, but as truth. They echoed against the crystal walls and settled into the hearts of every listener. Dozens of leaders stared, their eyes wide. Some gasped aloud. Others simply sat in stunned silence. Even the guards of the queen shifted slightly, though they dared not break discipline. Daniel felt the world tilt. He could not believe what he had just heard. A queen of unmatched power, ruler of an empire older than his species' presence among the stars, had just declared something unthinkable. She wished him as her husband. His mind raced. Marriage among humans was simple, personal, often tied to love and family. But among the Avaran, he did not yet know what it truly meant. Was it symbolic? Was it political? Was it binding in a way beyond human understanding? The shock made his thoughts stumble, but he kept his body still. He knew that every eye in the room was fixed on him. The silence stretched long, so long that it felt heavy. No one dared to move. Then the whispers began again, louder than before, like a storm breaking the calm. "She cannot be serious. A human? A young one. This is not possible." Daniel heard fragments of the voices around him, each filled with disbelief. Yet none dared to speak louder than a whisper, for fear of angering the queen. Cyrithis lifted her hand once more, and the whispers died instantly. The hall fell into complete silence again. Her eyes remained on Daniel as she spoke. "In your eyes I see honesty," she said, her voice steady. "In your stance I see courage that does not rely on armies. Among rulers who play with power as though it were a game, you stand as one who does not pretend. That is why I speak these words." Her voice held no tremor, no doubt. It was not a declaration made in passing. It was a truth she had chosen to reveal. The delegates shifted in discomfort. Many of them had served their own leaders for centuries. Many had fought to earn the queen's favor. Yet here she was, speaking of loyalty and trust, and giving her acknowledgement to a human who had no rank or power. Daniel's thoughts raced faster. He had never been trained for this. He was no great leader. He had been sent only to watch and learn. And now he stood at the center of the most important political hall in the galaxy, with the Queen of Avaran herself declaring a bond that even her closest allies could never dream of. His hands curled at his sides as he forced himself to breathe slowly. He knew he could not stay silent forever. Yet what could he say? To refuse might insult her. To accept might bind him to something far greater than he could manage. He felt the weight of the moment pressing on him, heavier than any burden he had known. The queen did not rush him. She simply watched, her eyes calm, as if she already knew that his words would matter. The hall, however, was not calm. Leaders leaned toward one another, whispering furiously. The representatives of the stronger empires looked uneasy. A few even looked angry. To them, a human was little more than a new arrival among the stars, untested, unworthy of standing beside the queen. Some feared that her declaration would weaken her empire. Others feared it would give humanity a place too powerful too soon. Still, none dared speak against her directly. To challenge the Queen of Avaran in her own hall was to invite destruction. At last, Daniel straightened his posture. His heart still raced, but he raised his chin and looked directly at Cyrithus. He spoke slowly, his voice steady enough to carry across the chamber. "Your Majesty," he said, "I am honored by your words, but I must ask why. Why would you, ruler of such power, choose someone like me?" The question hung in the air. It was not flattery. It was not fear. It was honest, the same honesty she had spoken of. The hall erupted again with whispers. Many were surprised that he had dared to speak so directly to her. Others were impressed that he had not simply bowed and accepted her words without thought. Cyrithus leaned back slightly in her throne. A faint smile touched her lips, so small that only those who watched closely could see it. "Because," she answered, "your people carry something that the stars have forgotten. You are not weighed down by centuries of pride or corruption. You are still young, still unshaped, and still willing to question. That is what I see in you." Her words sent another wave of shock through the hall. The Queen of Avaran, a ruler of unmatched wisdom, had declared that the future might rest in the hands of humanity. To many, it sounded like madness. To others, it sounded like prophecy. Daniel's chest tightened. He had no answer. He could not deny her words, nor could he fully understand them. All he knew was that the course of his life, and perhaps the course of his entire species, had just changed. The hall stirred uneasily, the sound of history being rewritten in whispers and gasps. And above it all, Cyrithus sat tall and calm upon her throne, her silver eyes never leaving the human who now stood at the center of her empire's attention. The words of Queen Cyrithus lingered in the hall like a storm that refused to pass. Her voice had been steady, her declaration clear, yet no one could fully grasp its weight. The Queen of Avaran had spoken of loyalty and trust, and then she had spoken of the human Daniel as though he alone carried these things in a way that no other ruler or diplomat did. The silence in the hall was heavy. Delegates shifted in their seats, their eyes darting between the Queen and the young human who stood in the back. Guards remained still, but even their eyes betrayed surprise. The hall had seen wars declared, treaties signed, and whole alliances shattered, but never had it seen a moment quite like this. Daniel's heart beat hard against his chest. He had asked his question with honesty, and the Queen had answered with words that sounded almost like prophecy. She had spoken of humanity as though it were destined for something greater, and she had spoken of him as though he were the example of it. But he was no hero. He was no leader. He was simply an observer, chosen because he had studied diplomacy and spoken carefully during minor exchanges. He had been proud to represent Earth, but he had never expected to become its voice in front of an empire. And yet here he was, standing under the gaze of the galaxy's most powerful queen. The Queen's silver eyes softened slightly, though her voice remained strong. "In the Avaran Empire," she began, "the word husband is not the same as among humans. To us, it is not merely a bond of affection or family. It is a pact of the highest order. A husband of the queen is the one she trusts above all others. It is the one who stands beside her throne, not above it, not below it, but beside it. It is not chosen lightly. It is not spoken as jest. It is a declaration of unshakable loyalty. The hall stirred. Delegates looked to one another, whispering again. Some nodded, now beginning to understand. Others frowned, still unable to accept that such words had been directed toward a human. This continued, her voice carrying like music that filled every corner of the chamber. For centuries I have ruled with strength. I have won wars, silenced rivals, and built alliances. Yet strength alone does not endure. What endures is trust. And trust is rare in this hall. Too often rulers hide their thoughts behind words of gold, yet within they think only of their own gain. Too often they say loyalty, but they mean only obedience. But this human stood in my hall, looked into my eyes, and asked not for power, not for riches, not for favor. He asked why. He dared to question, and he questioned with honesty. That is why I chose those words. The explanation struck the delegates like a wave. Some leaned back in their seats, shaken by the truth of her tone. Others narrowed their eyes, unwilling to accept it. Yet none could deny that the queen was serious. Daniel stood frozen, trying to take in her words. To her, husband meant not only partner but symbol of trust and loyalty. It was not a casual phrase. It was not romance alone. It was a vow that she had never spoken to anyone before. And she had spoken it to him. He felt the weight of it settle on his shoulders. His breath came shallow, and he forced himself to stand tall. The eyes of the galaxy were on him, but he reminded himself that he could not falter. To falter now would shame not only himself but the entire world he represented. One of the delegates finally found the courage to speak. He was tall, covered in green scales, his voice deep and smooth. "Your Majesty," he said, "surely this is too much. A human cannot carry such a role. They are too young as a people, too untested. How can one of them be placed so near to your throne?" The hall held its breath. To question the queen openly was dangerous, yet the delegate had spoken carefully, with respect. This turned her silver gaze on him. "You speak of years and of power," she said. "Yes, humans are young. Their fleets are small, their armies fewer. Yet tell me, Scaled One, when last did you question me with honesty? When last did you speak without calculation in your voice? You fear the youth of humanity, but I say it is their youth that makes them worthy. They are not yet bound by the chains of pride that weigh down the old." The delegate lowered his gaze. He had no answer. Another voice rose, this one from a thin, translucent figure whose body glowed faintly blue. "Your Majesty," the figure said, "we do not doubt your wisdom. Yet if the bond you speak of is sacred, should it not be made with one who already holds power equal to your own? A union of strength and strength, empire and empire." The queen's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "And that," she replied, "is why I do not choose such a union. Too often strength binds to strength only to grow heavier with arrogance. I do not seek another throne to stand beside mine. I seek a heart that will question, a voice that will remind me when I forget, a hand that will hold loyalty without ambition. That is what I see in him." Her words carried across the chamber with such clarity that even the most doubtful fell silent. Daniel swallowed hard. He felt heat rise in his chest. He had done nothing to deserve such words, yet the queen had spoken them as truth. He wanted to protest, to say he was unworthy, but another part of him whispered that to deny her now would dishonor her gift. Still, he struggled within himself. Why me, he thought. Why not someone wiser, older, stronger? Yet her gaze held him fast, and in her eyes he saw no mistake. The hall shifted again as whispers resumed. The meaning was now clear. The Queen's declaration had not been romantic alone. It had been symbolic, political, spiritual. She had chosen the human as a symbol of trust and honesty in a galaxy that had long forgotten such things. Some delegates feared what this meant for their own power. If the Queen trusted a human more than them, their influence might shrink. Others saw opportunity. If humanity gained favor with the Queen, perhaps it would rise quickly among the stars. Daniel felt the weight of history pressing on him. He realized that her words would echo far beyond this hall. They would be carried to every world, every colony, every fleet. Humanity, once considered small and untested, would now be seen as chosen. The Queen leaned forward slightly, her eyes never leaving him. "Do you understand now, human?" she asked. "Do you see why I spoke those words?" Daniel hesitated, his throat dry. He wanted to say yes, but he knew he did not fully understand. He wanted to say no, but he feared it would dishonor her. At last, he spoke carefully. "I think I begin to understand, Your Majesty," he said. "But I also know that such words carry weight beyond me. If I stand in that place beside you, I do not carry only myself. I carry all of my people. And I fear I may not be worthy." The hall stirred again, but Sirithis raised her hand and silenced them. Her gaze softened further, and for a moment she looked less like a queen and more like a teacher. "Worthiness," she said, "is not born from pride or power. Worthiness is proven in the moment one chooses honesty over falsehood, courage over fear. You have already shown that. Do not think yourself unworthy when you have already walked the path." Daniel felt his breath catch. Her words struck something deep within him. He had never seen himself as great. He had only ever tried to do what was right. And now she was telling him that this was enough. The hall remained silent, waiting for his response. At last, Daniel bowed his head slightly. "I will try, Your Majesty," he said. It was not a promise of glory. It was not a vow of perfection. It was simple, humble, and true. And for the first time in many years, Queen Sirithis smiled openly. The hall gasped. The sight of the Queen smiling was rarer than an eclipse, and yet it had happened. The moment sealed itself into memory. The meaning of her words was now clear. The Queen had chosen to trust not the most powerful, not the wealthiest, not the oldest, but the one who questioned with honesty. And the galaxy would never be the same. The Grand Hall of the Avaran Empire still held its silence after the Queen's declaration. Delegates shifted in their seats, their eyes burning with questions they dared not voice. Guards stood unmoving at the walls, yet even they were unsettled inside. The Queen had spoken of trust and loyalty and had placed that trust in a human, a species so young that many in the room still saw them as children among stars. Daniel stood frozen. His heart thundered in his chest, but his face showed calm. He had bowed and spoken humbly, yet the moment was far from over. The Queen's words had thrown the entire chamber into a storm of thoughts and whispers. Every leader present wanted to know what he would do next. He was not a soldier. He was not a king. He was not even a full diplomat. He had been sent to observe, to listen, and to learn. Yet fate had drawn him into the center of a story that would shape the future of his people. Sirithis leaned back on her throne, Her silver eyes locked on him. She said nothing more, waiting. The silence was no longer heavy with tension but filled with expectation. It was as though the entire galaxy had paused to hear what one human would say. Daniel forced himself to breathe slowly. He remembered the faces of his teachers back on Earth, who had told him that diplomacy was not about words alone but about courage, honesty, and presence. He remembered his mother, who had told him as a boy that truth was stronger than pride. He remembered his father, who had worked with steady hands even when no one noticed. Those memories steadied him. He raised his chin and stepped forward from the back row. The echo of his footsteps carried through the hall. Each sound seemed louder than it should have been, as though the very floor wanted the galaxy to hear him. When he reached the open space before the Queen's throne, he stopped and looked up. His voice, though quiet, carried clearly. "Your Majesty," he began, "I am honored by your words, but I am also afraid of them. You speak of trust, of loyalty, and of choosing me to stand beside you. Yet I am only one man. I carry no fleets, no armies, no empire. My people are still new among the stars. I must ask, why would you give such weight to me?" The words rang through the chamber like a question to the stars. The delegates leaned closer, eager to hear the Queen's reply. Some expected her to strike him down for daring to question. Others expected her to dismiss him. But Cyrithis only smiled faintly, her expression calm. "You fear your limits," she said. "That is good. A ruler who does not fear their own limits becomes blind. You say you carry no fleets, no armies, no empire. But I tell you, human, that these are not the things that build trust. Trust is built by the one who speaks with honesty even when the hall waits to crush him. You stand here with nothing but your voice, and yet your words weigh more than a fleet. That is why I look to you." The hall stirred again. The delegates were not used to hearing such words. They were used to strength being measured in weapons and worlds. Yet here was their queen, saying that one human's honesty was greater than empires. Daniel's hands curled slightly at his sides. Her words were powerful, but they did not answer the fear that gripped him. He knew that if he accepted her trust, he would not carry only himself. He would carry the weight of humanity's place among the stars. "Your Majesty," he said again, steadying his voice, "if I accept your trust, then every word I speak, every step I take, will reflect not only me but my people. What if I fail? What if I cannot carry the burden you give me?" This time the Queen rose from her throne. Her tall figure cast a long shadow across the hall. She walked down the steps slowly, each step echoing like a drum beat. When she reached the base of the throne, she stopped, standing only a short distance from him. Her silver eyes looked directly into his. For a long moment, the hall was silent. No one dared to move, for the Queen rarely left her throne during assemblies. Finally, she spoke, her voice lower but filled with strength. "Failure is not the end, human. Failure is the path that teaches courage. I do not choose you because you will never fail. I choose you because when you fail, you will rise again. That is what I see in you. That is what your people carry. That is why I spoke those words." Daniel's breath caught. Her voice was steady, her eyes unshaken. She believed what she said, with no doubt. The hall murmured again, unsettled. The delegates exchanged glances. Some were angry, feeling their power slipping. Others were curious, wondering if humanity truly carried something the old empires had lost. A few even looked hopeful, thinking perhaps this human might be the change the galaxy needed. One delegate, a tall figure with wings folded tight against his back, rose to speak. His voice was sharp, almost accusing. Your Majesty, if you place such trust in this human, then what place do the rest of us hold? Are centuries of loyalty now worth less than the honesty of one young species? The Queen turned her gaze on him. Her presence alone silenced his rising tone. You misunderstand, she said. I do not cast aside the loyalty of others. But loyalty that is blind is not loyalty at all. It is only obedience. True loyalty is forged in choice, in courage, in honesty. That is what I honor here. The winged delegate lowered his head, chastened. Daniel stood still, but his thoughts raced. He realized that every word he spoke now could shape humanity's future. If he showed weakness, humans would be seen as weak. If he showed arrogance, humans would be seen as reckless. He needed to find the balance, to speak with the same honesty that had drawn the Queen's trust in the first place. He took a slow breath, then spoke again. Your Majesty, he said, I do not ask for thrones or crowns. I do not ask to be lifted above others. If I stand beside you, then let it be as one who speaks truth, not as one who seeks power. If that is what you ask, then I will try to be worthy of it. The hall erupted in whispers again, but this time the tone was different. There was surprise, yes, but also respect. The human had not grasped for power as many feared. He had spoken simply, honestly, humbly. The Queen's lips curved once more into a smile, rare and shining. Then you understand, she said softly. And that is enough. For the first time in centuries, the hall of the Avaran Empire felt changed. The Queen stood not as a ruler of cold distance but as one who had chosen to trust beyond her empire. The human had spoken not with ambition but with honesty, and that honesty had moved even the most doubtful. The delegates still had their doubts, their fears, their questions. But the seed had been planted. Humanity, once unnoticed, now stood at the center of galactic history. And Daniel, once an observer, now carried a role he had never imagined. The Queen turned to face the hall once more, her voice carrying across the chamber. Let it be known, she declared, that the words I have spoken are not jest, not symbol, but truth. This human has shown what many of you have forgotten. And in that truth, I place my trust. The chamber shook with the force of her declaration. Some bowed, others stayed rigid, but none could deny what had just happened. Daniel stood in silence, his heart heavy but steady. He knew his life had changed forever. And he knew that the path ahead would not be easy. But he also knew that he could not step back. Not now. The hall of the Avaran Empire had witnessed something greater than alliances or treaties. It had witnessed a moment that would echo through centuries. The grand hall of the Avaran Empire stood wrapped in silence after the Queen's final words. The air itself felt charged, as if the very stones of the chamber had absorbed the weight of her declaration. A single human, Daniel, had been chosen by the Queen in a way that no ruler, no ambassador, no general had ever been chosen before. The hall was filled with power, yet none dared to speak first. The delegates sat stiffly in their places. Some stared with disbelief, their jaws tight and their eyes sharp. Others looked thoughtful, their minds racing as they calculated what this moment might mean. A few gazed at Daniel with curiosity rather than anger, as if they saw in him something they could not yet name. Daniel himself felt as though he stood at the center of a storm. His body was still, his face calm, but inside his chest his heart raced. He had spoken honestly, and the Queen had answered with trust. Now the hall waited, and he felt the weight of their stares pressing on him from all sides. Queen Sirithis remained at the front, tall and steady, her robe flowing like liquid silver. She had declared her choice, and she stood by it with the same calm authority that had carried her through wars and ages. Her gaze swept across the hall, daring any to challenge her openly. None did. Even the strongest leaders, who had ruled their own people for centuries, lowered their eyes when her gaze passed over them. But the silence could not last forever. At last, one delegate rose from his seat. He was a broad figure with skin that shone like polished bronze, his voice deep and heavy. "Your Majesty," he said, his tone respectful but edged with doubt, "your words carry great weight, but I fear they may shake the balance of this hall. For centuries your empire has stood as the center of order among us. Yet today you place trust in a species that has not yet proven itself. Will this not bring danger to the peace we guard?" The hall stirred as many nodded. It was a question that lay in every mind, though few dared to voice it. Sirithis turned her silver eyes upon him, calm but sharp. "Peace," she said, "is not guarded by silence and tradition alone. Peace is guarded by truth. And truth does not wait for centuries before it is seen. Humanity has already shown its heart. This human stands here without crown, without army, yet he dares to speak with honesty before me. Tell me, Bronze One, how many among you would do the same if you stood in his place?" The delegate lowered his gaze. He had no answer. Another delegate stood, her body tall and thin like flowing glass, her voice soft but clear. "Your Majesty," she said, "none doubt your wisdom, but the bond you speak of is sacred. If you name him in this way, then you lift humanity higher than all of us. Some will see this as unfair. Some will resist it." The queen did not hesitate. "Let them resist," she said. "An empire does not bend to fear of others. I do not raise humanity above you. I raise honesty above ambition. And if that honesty is found in a human, then let the galaxy learn from them." Her words struck like thunder, and the hall fell silent once more. Daniel listened, his thoughts heavy. He did not feel raised above others. He did not feel like a symbol of honesty. He felt like a man caught in something greater than himself. Yet the queen's words were clear. She trusted him, and she trusted his people. He could not betray that trust, no matter how unprepared he felt. The silence stretched again until another figure spoke, this time not from a seat but from near the doors. It was one of the queen's generals, armored and strong, his voice sharp with concern. "Your Majesty," he said, "if this human is to stand beside you, then he must be tested. Trust cannot rest only on words. Let him prove himself, not in speeches but in action." The hall stirred again, and many nodded. Some looked pleased at the suggestion, as if hoping the human would fail and end this strange rise. Others looked cautious, wondering what kind of test might come. Sirithis turned to the general, her expression unreadable. "Do you doubt my judgment?" she asked. The general bowed his head at once. "Never, Majesty. But even the strongest steel is tested in fire. If he is truly worthy of your trust, then let that worth be seen by all." For a long moment the queen said nothing. Then she turned back to Daniel, her silver eyes steady. "Human," she said, "would you accept such a trial?" Daniel's breath caught. A trial? A test? He had no idea what it would mean. It could be dangerous, political, or symbolic. Yet he knew the eyes of the hall were on him. If he refused, he would look weak. If he accepted and failed, he would shame himself and his people. But if he accepted and endured, then perhaps the queen's trust would be proven true. He drew a slow breath, steadying himself. His voice was quiet but strong when he spoke. If a trial is the way to prove I carry honesty and loyalty, then I will accept it, Your Majesty. The hall erupted in whispers again. Some scoffed, certain the human would fail. Others leaned forward, eager to see what might come. Cyrithis raised her hand, and silence fell once more. Her gaze softened as she looked at him. Then let it be so, she said. But know this. The trial I set for you will not be of swords or fire. It will not be to fight beasts or armies. It will be a trial of truth. You will walk among those who doubt you. You will face questions that seek to twist your words. And you will stand before this hall again to answer. If your honesty endures, then no one will deny what I have spoken today. Daniel felt a wave of relief and fear at once. He would not be asked to fight with weapons, but words and truth could be as sharp as any blade. He would be tested in the one thing he had always trusted most, his voice. He bowed his head. I will face it, Your Majesty. The Queen smiled faintly, and for the third time that day, the hall gasped. She had smiled more in one meeting with a human than she had in decades of rule. She turned back to the assembly, her voice firm. You have heard. You have seen. The trial will come, and it will be witnessed by all. Until then, remember this. Power without trust is nothing. And today, trust has spoken. Her words echoed through the hall like a bell that would not fade. The assembly could no longer hide its reaction. Some delegates rose in protest, their voices sharp but careful, never daring to strike directly at the Queen. Others remained seated, thoughtful, weighing what this meant for the future. A few bowed their heads, accepting her words as truth. Daniel stood still, but his mind swirled. He had stepped into the hall as an observer, meant only to watch. Now he had been chosen, tested, and placed on a path that would shape the place of his people in the galaxy. He was afraid, but he was also steady. He would face the trial, whatever it meant. The Queen returned to her throne, tall and unshaken. She did not speak again, for she knew her words had already changed history. And so the hall emptied slowly, delegates whispering as they left, their eyes darting back to the human who now stood at the center of the galaxy's greatest stage. Some saw him as a threat. Some saw him as a chance. All knew that the galaxy had shifted. Daniel remained for a moment longer, standing in the silence of the hall. He looked up at the ceiling filled with stars, and he thought of Earth, small and fragile in the wide universe. He thought of the people who had sent him here with nothing but hope. And he thought of the Queen's silver eyes, filled with trust. His voice was low, meant only for himself, but in it carried a quiet promise. I will not fail. The words were simple, yet they burned like fire in his chest. The stunned assembly had witnessed history. The galaxy would not forget this day.